Hi, I'm Kellan. I lived in the same house for over a decade, built the garden, fixed the roof, paid the bills. Then one day, at dinner, my parents told me they were giving it all to my brother, as a wedding gift, and I had 60 days to leave. But the worst part? They didn't just erase me from the will. They rewrote the past, forged my name, and called it family. Why would your own blood turn your life's work into someone else's legacy? Let me show you what they never saw coming. The kitchen smelled like rosemary chicken and baked potatoes, but none of it felt familiar anymore. The air in the room had changed, heavier, stiffer, like a storm pressing down without rain. I sat at the table across from my parents, trying not to notice how perfect everything looked. Cloth napkins instead of paper, the good plates out, even wine. It wasn't a holiday, not anyone's birthday. But it was a Thursday, and something was off. Vernon, my father, cleared his throat the way he did before church speeches or HOA meetings. "Your mother and I have something to share," he said. Marietta looked at me with a smile so carefully rehearsed it cracked at the edges. "We've made a decision," she added. "It's about the house." I pushed my fork across the plate. The food I'd made, my usual Thursday night dinner, had gone cold. "Alaric and Bryony are getting married," Dad continued, "and we've decided it would be best to give them the house, as a wedding gift." At first, I thought I misheard. Maybe he said they'd be house-sitting. Maybe he said something else. But he looked straight at me and added, "You'll have 60 days to move out." There wasn't an ounce of hesitation in his voice, not even a blink. Marietta reached across the table, laid a hand on mine. "We know this is a lot, honey, but it's time. You've been here a long time. This will give you the push to start something new." My mouth went dry. I didn't speak. I didn't trust my voice not to crack. Alaric leaned back in his chair, already smiling like a man who'd won a silent bet. "We're thinking about repainting the exterior," he said. "Maybe knock down the back wall and open up the kitchen. We've got some great ideas." I stared at him, at his perfectly pressed shirt, his polished nails, his phone buzzing on the table. He hadn't lifted a paintbrush in his life. "The house?" I asked quietly. "The one I've lived in for the past 10 years? Dad nodded, as if confirming a delivery. "Yes, it's a family decision." My hands stayed flat on the table. My fingers didn't move. Marietta tried again. "Kellan, you've done so much for this place, and we appreciate that. But Alaric is starting a family. It just makes more sense." More sense. Like logic could justify rewriting history. I had spent 10 years in that house, painted the rooms, fixed the plumbing, rewired the garage after Dad forgot to hire an electrician, installed the garden beds, replaced the floor in the living room. I had every receipt filed in the cabinet upstairs. But none of that mattered now. I didn't argue, didn't ask why. I finished chewing the bite of potato in my mouth and set down my fork. Then I smiled, softly, like I didn't mind, like none of it touched me at all. Dinner ended without another word from me. The conversation drifted back to wedding plans and guest lists. I cleared my plate, washed it, dried it, stood there in the kitchen with my back to them, feeling something break. Not loudly, but with finality. Upstairs, I closed my bedroom door gently. The hallway light still flickered from the motion sensor I installed 2 summers ago. I leaned back against the door, slid down until I was sitting on the floor. The room was quiet. These were the walls I painted Navajo white after the old wallpaper peeled. The floor I sanded and sealed myself when I couldn't afford contractors. The window I'd replaced after the storm cracked it in 2018. This wasn't just a house. It was my work, my weekends, my decisions, my time. And now it was a gift. I got up, pulled a small notebook from my drawer, wrote one line at the top of the page. 60 days. Let's see. Later, as I lay on my bed, Bryony's laugh carried up from downstairs. Sharp, unbothered. It echoed through the vents like an alarm I hadn't realized I'd set. I turned my face toward the window. The trees outside rustled. The same trees I planted with Dad when I moved back in. "Let them think I'll walk away quietly," I whispered. I opened the box and stared at the receipt that started it all, $412.37, for paint, rollers, and a rented sprayer. I still remembered the smell of primer clinging to the back of my throat as I covered every inch of that sunroom in 2 coats. That was the first of many. I didn't know then I was investing in someone else's inheritance. A loud truck engine pulled me out of the memory. I glanced through the blinds. A delivery crew was unloading folding chairs and round tables onto our driveway. Balloons bobbed in the breeze, tied to the gatepost. One of them read, "She said yes." I didn't ask. No one told me. But I knew exactly what this was. I got up, put on a sweatshirt, and headed downstairs. As I passed through the front hallway, I noticed the family gallery wall had changed. My photos, me holding a rake, fixing the fence, planting tulips, were gone. In their place, Alaric and Bryony, laughing on vacation, kissing in front of a mountain, dressed in perfectly color-coordinated clothes. Even the frame from Dad's retirement party was moved to the guest room. When I stepped into the kitchen, I found strangers assembling a champagne tower on my counter. One man glanced at me and smiled. "You the caterer?" I didn't respond, just nodded and poured myself a cup of coffee. From the corner of my eye, I caught Vernon in the living room, deep in conversation with a woman wearing a badge that said, "Event Coordinator." He saw me, gave a curt nod, then turned back to his guest. No one spoke to me. No one needed to. The banner was already going up on the front porch. Engagement celebration, Alaric and Bryony. It was real. They had turned my home into a party venue without so much as a knock on my door. By mid-afternoon, the house buzzed with guests. Bryony's cousins, former classmates, co-workers, all laughing, sipping, sharing photos. I moved from room to room like a ghost, stepping around rented centerpieces and buffet trays. Then came the moment that etched itself into memory. Alaric stood near the fireplace, holding a cloth-draped frame. "Before we kick off the night," he said, "I want to show Bryony something special." He pulled the cloth off with a flourish. It was a painting, digitally stylized, professionally done. A watercolor of the house, bathed in golden light, with scripted lettering at the bottom. "The Merrick Estate, our new chapter." Gasps, applause, champagne flutes raised. Bryony put her hand over her heart. "You did this?" she asked. Alaric nodded. "Our home. For our future." I stood in the doorway to the dining room, half hidden behind a floral arch someone had zip-tied to the stair railing. My jaw clenched so hard I thought I might crack a molar. That portrait hung over the mantel I refinished by hand, the very room where I'd spent Christmases, quiet winters, late nights sketching renovation plans. Now, it was a photo backdrop for people who didn't know the house used to leak every time it snowed. "Excuse me," a voice said from behind. I turned. Bryony's cousin, tall, chipper, wearing a sequined dress, smiled at me. "Hi, could you put this on?" She handed me a laminated name tag clipped to a lanyard. It read, "House Staff, Kellan." I blinked. She laughed like it was nothing. "It's just for fun. Everyone's wearing a title. Photographer, maid of honor, chef. Yours is, for hosting." Before I could answer, Bryony appeared beside her. She noticed the tag and froze. "Oh, it's just a joke," she said quickly. "Theme thing. You don't have to wear it." I didn't say a word. I didn't nod. I just walked away, carrying the tag in my hand. In the backyard, the string lights I installed 2 summers ago flickered above the guests. Someone had moved my herb planters to make space for a DJ booth. I stood by the shed and stared at the patch of soil where I once tried to grow tomatoes. Failed attempt, but mine. The laughter faded behind me as I knelt down and reached under the loose board behind the garden shed. I pulled out a small, rusted metal box. Inside were folded papers, drawings, plans, purchase lists, my handwriting from 10 years ago, the first time I mapped out a deck design for this yard. Back then, I thought I'd live here forever. I stood, dusted off the lid, and whispered to no one. They think this house is theirs. Let's prove them wrong. I picked up the photo, holding it like it might burn through my fingers. It showed me standing on a ladder, one foot braced against the siding, a nail gun in my hand. I was halfway through building the porch. My porch. The timestamp on the back confirmed the year 2016. Bryony hadn't even met Alaric yet. I slipped the photo into the box and carried it inside. The living room was quiet now, emptied of decorations, no remnants of the party except a few glittering specks on the hardwood floor. I sat at the dining table and laid everything out. The receipts, the drawings, the photos. They formed a mosaic of my life, pieces no one else seemed to remember existed. The walls still smelled faintly of lavender oil, the kind I used after sanding them down. I glanced toward the kitchen. The butcher block island I'd installed myself sat gleaming under the overhead lights, polished by the caterers the day before, no doubt. I thought about the trench I dug for the irrigation system. It took me 3 weekends. I remember the blisters, the stone I couldn't get out of the soil without a crowbar, and the sunburn that left me peeling for days. While I was sweating through that summer, Alaric had been in Maui, sending me pictures of his cocktails like I was supposed to be impressed. They didn't remember that. The backyard used to feel like mine in a way no one could question. Now it felt like a showroom, staged for people who hadn't earned it. People who didn't understand that the garden didn't plant itself, that the deck didn't rise from the dirt by magic. I sat in silence, letting the bitterness crawl up my spine like ivy. That evening, while taking out the trash, I ran into Mrs. Lowry from 2 houses down. She looked me over, hesitated, then said, "I had no idea Alaric paid for all those upgrades. He must have really stepped up." I blinked at her. "Excuse me?" She gave a small, nervous laugh. "Your father mentioned it at the party. Said Alaric took care of all the remodeling over the years. Real go-getter, he called him." I didn't respond. I just nodded once and walked back inside before she could finish the rest of the lie. That hit harder than I expected. Not because I believed it, but because someone else did. When I sat back down at the table, I didn't just see photos and receipts anymore. I saw a story, one that was being overwritten while I watched. They weren't just erasing my name from the deed. They were rewriting me out of the narrative entirely. They were trying to make it so I'd never existed here. Marietta hadn't said a word when Vernon told that story. She just smiled, poured wine, nodded along. That hurt more than the lie itself. I got to work. First I made copies, high-resolution scans, backups of everything. Then I printed them. Each receipt had its photo, each renovation labeled with the date and scope. I used sticky notes to add short descriptions. Kitchen tile, May 2019. Fence installation, July 2015. By the time I finished, the table was covered edge to edge. I stood back and took a photo of the whole spread, then attached a yellow sticky note to the first page. This house had a builder. His name wasn't Alaric. I don't know what made me check the porch light sensor, but I stepped outside a few minutes later and saw Arnold from next door walking up my driveway. He held a manila envelope. "Saw the party the other day," he said without small talk. "Bit of a circus." I didn't answer. "Found these cleaning out the garage," he added, handing me the envelope. You building that porch, right? Inside were 4 prints, grainy but clear. Me with a tool belt bent over a plank, me laying cement blocks, me in the middle of the yard, arms crossed, blueprint rolled in one hand. I looked at the photo, then at my own face reflected in the glass of the front door behind him. Maybe it's time someone else heard the truth. The next morning, I sat across from Rowena with my evidence folder on the table. She hadn't even opened it yet. She just watched me for a second, sipping her coffee like she was waiting to see if I'd flinch first. I didn't. I didn't have it in me anymore. You sure you want to go there? She finally asked. I nodded. They're not going to stop. I need to be ready. She reached for the folder. Then let's get to work. Later that afternoon, back at the house, I stepped outside to get some air. The sun had started to dip behind the neighbor's roofline, casting long shadows across the backyard. It should have been peaceful. Instead, I heard Alaric's voice, sharp and animated, coming from around the corner. I moved closer, careful not to make a sound. Yeah, we'll tear the pergola down, he said into his phone. The garden beds, too. I want a clean slate for the pool install. Bryony hates the raised look anyway. I stood there in the silence that followed, letting the words settle in my chest like wet cement. Then I rounded the corner and said, without raising my voice, "That garden was built before your last relationship ended." He turned, startled, then smirked. You don't live here anymore, remember? It wasn't what he said. It was how casually he said it, like I was a name someone forgot to include on a guest list. I stared at him for a long moment, didn't blink, didn't step back. He shifted uncomfortably and looked away first. That night, we had dinner like nothing had happened. Same table, same silverware, same silence filling the room. Marietta made stew. Alaric scrolled on his phone under the table. So, Vernon said between bites, Alaric's been talking to some pool contractors. We're thinking of breaking ground before the wedding. I wiped my mouth and reached for a small stack of papers I'd left near the edge of the table. Quietly, I placed one on the placemat in front of me. A copy of the renovation permit I pulled when I built the deck. My name, my money, my work. Before anyone digs, I said, folding my napkin, you might want to check who paid for that foundation. Marietta's spoon paused halfway to her mouth. Vernon chuckled like I'd just made a dry joke. You always were sentimental about these things. Alaric didn't laugh. He looked at the paper, then at me. You think that means anything now? I think it means I kept records, I said. The rest of dinner passed in forced conversation and shifting eyes. When the plates were cleared and the kitchen dimmed, I retreated to my room, not expecting company. But not long after, there was a knock. I opened the door to find Marietta, her hands clutching a folded dish towel like it was a peace treaty. Can we talk? I stepped aside and let her in. She sat at the edge of my bed, looked around like she was seeing it for the first time. What are you trying to do, Kellan? I leaned against the dresser. Draw a line, for once. She looked down. He's your brother. Your family. Can't we just keep things from getting ugly? They got ugly the day you gave away the only home I've ever built. Her voice cracked. We didn't mean it like that. But that's exactly what it was. She nodded slowly, stood up, and walked to the door. Before she left, she turned back and said, Please don't ruin this for everyone. I'm not the one doing the ruining. She didn't respond. Once she was gone, I pulled my phone from the desk and typed out a message. Meet me tomorrow. We're going to need to talk about equity interest. I hit send and walked into the hallway. The family portrait was gone, the one that used to hang above the staircase. I stared at the blank space, trying to remember if I was ever really in it to begin with. The next morning, my phone buzzed with Rowena's voice message. "Check your email, now." I already knew what she meant. I had just sent her everything the night before. Every scan, every receipt, every photo, all the pieces that had quietly documented a decade of effort no one had cared to notice until now. By noon, we were sitting across from each other in a coffee shop downtown. Neutral ground. She brought her laptop and a portable scanner. I brought a manila folder thick enough to bruise a wrist. She didn't ask me how I was. She knew better than that. "So," she said, tapping her stylus against her notebook. "You're ready to take them on?" I looked at her. "I'm not doing this to fight. I'm doing this to be seen." Rowena nodded once, like she'd expected the answer. We spent the next hour cross-referencing every receipt with dates on the home improvement permits. I remembered each one like old stories, some funny, some painful. The time I fell off the ladder installing the new shutters. The week I stayed home from work to monitor the roofer who never showed up on time. The tile work I did in the bathroom after Mom slipped and sprained her wrist. Rowena paused once and said, "You realize this is enough to show material investment, right? In court?" I nodded but didn't respond. There was nothing left to explain. By late afternoon, I was back at the house. The air felt like rain. The driveway was empty, unusually quiet. I was about to head upstairs when someone knocked. It was Bryony. She stood on the porch like she wasn't sure she had the right address. "Can I talk to you?" I stepped aside and let her in. She didn't sit, just hovered near the entryway, glancing around like the walls were whispering secrets. "I'm sorry to drop by," she said, "but I need to ask you something." "Okay." She took out her phone, thumbed through the gallery, and held it out to me. This was from the party. The portrait, the one Alaric had framed. He told me he designed the whole backyard. Did he? She didn't finish the question. I pulled out a binder from the cabinet and laid it on the table. "You want the truth? Here it is." I flipped through pages. Blueprints, sketches, dated photos. One of me knee-deep in mud, laying the irrigation. Another of the deck framing, mid-construction. I didn't look at her while she read. She sat down. "I didn't know," she said softly. "He said you were just staying here, helping out. That's one version." She exhaled. I believed him. He always makes it sound so convincing. I nodded. "That's the thing about liars. They rehearse." She looked like she wanted to say something else, but didn't. Instead, she stood, whispered, "Thank you," and walked out. That evening, dinner was quieter than usual. Alaric wasn't home. It was just Vernon, Marietta, and me. The air was brittle. I waited until Vernon finished his second glass of wine before I said anything. "I met with a lawyer." His fork stopped halfway to his mouth. Marietta blinked. "You what?" "I'm seeking legal advice," I said calmly. Vernon's face flushed. "You'd sue your own parents?" "I'll sue anyone who tries to erase me." He slammed his fork down. "You ungrateful." "Don't," Marietta said sharply. Her voice cracked halfway through the word. I turned to her. "You stood by while he gave away everything I built. If you thought I'd let that go quietly, you don't know me at all." For a long moment, nobody moved. The only sound was the clock ticking over the microwave. Vernon shook his head. "We raised you better." "No," I said. "You raised me silent." Later that night, I sat in my room with the flash drive in my hand. Rowena had preloaded it with everything. Organized folders, time-stamped photos, a spreadsheet of costs down to the last penny. She'd labeled it, "Kellan, Property Equity Materials." I plugged it into my laptop and clicked Upload to Secure Drive. As the files began to transfer, I leaned back and exhaled. They're going to wish they'd just said thank you. Rowena called before I could even shut my laptop. Her voice was flat, unreadable. "You said you wanted a line," she said. "This is a breach so clean you could drive a truck through it." It had started earlier that morning. I was digging through the attic looking for a few old utility bills. I hadn't been up there in years. The air was thick with insulation dust and the kind of silence that made you feel like you were trespassing in your own life. That's when I saw it. A box marked in Marietta's handwriting, faint but familiar. Mortgage docs. I opened the lid and pulled out a stack of folders. Most were routine: tax statements, interest letters, warranty pamphlets for a fridge that had died years ago. But wedged in the middle was a file with my name typed on the front. Inside, a home equity loan agreement. And my signature. Except it wasn't mine. I stared at it for a long time. The curve of the K was too round, the spacing too tight. Whoever forged it had practiced, but not well enough. The date? February 8th. I was in Portland that week, leading a project for a non-profit build downtown. I double-checked my calendar, then my old travel receipts. Hotel confirmation, gas, a dinner charge from a diner near the job site. Whoever signed that document had done it while I was over 300 miles away. I flipped to the next page. Payout records. Every line item made my chest tighten. $12,000 for the new roof, $9,300 for the driveway, $6,000 for the siding. All projects I'd managed, all paid using money I didn't know existed under my name. Taped to one receipt was a yellow sticky note in Marietta's slanted script. "Don't tell Kellan yet," Vernon said later. I sat back on my heels and stared at the ceiling rafters. For a second, I didn't feel angry. I felt cold. Hollow. The silence that followed wasn't the silence of shock. It was the kind that came after something inside you stopped trying. I took photos of every page, every signature, every sticky note. Sent them to Rowena. Her reply came back less than 2 minutes later. "This is felony-level fraud. We're not just talking about property anymore." I didn't respond right away. I couldn't. Instead, I opened a window and let the attic air bleed into the morning. I stood there for a long time, breathing deep, anchoring myself in the betrayal I could finally name. Around noon, someone knocked at the back door. It was Arnold, our neighbor. He held a plastic grocery bag in one hand, his usual newspaper tucked under the other. "Found these cleaning out my garage," he said. "Thought you'd want them." Inside were a dozen printed photographs, slightly curled at the edges. Each one showed me on the roof 3 summers ago. Helmet on, nail gun strapped, sweat soaking through my t-shirt. The date stamps in the corner were clear: July 14th, 15th, 16th. "I remember because your dad told the HOA that Alaric funded the remodel," Arnold added, voice low. "But we all saw it was you." I looked up at him, unsure what to say. He tapped the porch railing and nodded. "Truth's not always loud, but it leaves marks." He left before I could thank him. I brought the bag upstairs and laid the photos beside the loan papers. My laptop was still open on the bed. Something inside me clicked, like a tumbling lock finally catching. I opened my inbox and searched. It didn't take long. Subject line: "Need help handling roof quotes, tight on funds." Vernon had sent it 3 years ago, attached to it a PDF of 3 contractor bids. In the body: "Can you handle this one, kiddo? We'll settle up later." I clicked the attachment again. Embedded at the end of the contractor packet was a digital signature page, with my name already typed in. I never signed that file. I never saw it. Until now. I hovered over the forward button. My cursor didn't shake. To Rowena subject. I'm done playing fair. Click. I stared at the text, rereading it until the screen blurred. Rowena's words echoed like a final verdict. This just turned from civil to criminal. But Alaric didn't respond with silence. He responded with a performance. The next day, a slick video popped up on social media titled, "Restoring the Merrick Legacy." The thumbnail? A perfectly staged shot of Alaric standing on our front porch, smiling like the golden child he never was. I clicked play. Soft piano music, warm lighting, Alaric's voiceover talking about preserving family history and bringing the old house back to life. Then came the kicker. Clips of me working on the property. Me on a ladder, me with a power drill, me staining the deck. The narration? Inspired by my brother's early care for the home, I knew I had to finish what we started. Finish? The comment section lit up like wildfire. Wow, Alaric, what a gift to your parents. Your brother must be proud. Love that you documented the whole process. I didn't comment. I didn't reply. I just watched, cold, as the lies calcified into something that looked like truth. That video was getting shared across our extended family group chats before noon. Bryony called me around 6. Can we meet? She didn't wait for me to say yes. We sat across from each other at the kitchen table. She looked tired. Not mascara smeared or dramatic, just weary, like someone holding too many secrets in too small a purse. I talked to Alaric, she began. He said he apologized to you. I raised an eyebrow. He did, sort of, in between checking his phone every 5 seconds. She looked away. He recorded it, didn't he? I asked. She paused too long. Thought so, I said. If he's going to lie, the least he could do is not do it on camera. I didn't know he was filming, she said quickly. Does it matter? I asked. She didn't answer that. Instead, she asked quietly, do you want to press charges? I want peace, I said. But I'll settle for truth. She nodded slowly. He hasn't paid the caterer, or the florist. I only found out because I called to confirm the tasting date and they said there was a balance due. He keeps saying not to worry, that the funds are tied up. Tied up in what? Fantasy? I don't know, she whispered. I don't know anymore. Later that night, dinner was quiet again. I was halfway through my plate when Vernon said, loud enough to hear from the next county, did you all see Alaric's video? Real professional work. Makes the whole family look good. Marietta smiled, almost proudly. It's polished. He's good at presentation. I put my fork down. He's lying, I said. Vernon's expression dropped. What are you talking about? He didn't restore anything. He stole footage, twisted it, then made himself the hero. Marietta tilted her head. It's just branding. People understand that. No, I said. They don't, and neither should you. The silence that followed was thick. Vernon clenched his jaw but said nothing. Marietta's face was unreadable. I stood and left the table without another word. Back in my room, I pulled the USB from the drawer. It contained everything. Photos, permits, receipts, and now a copy of Alaric's video. I dropped it off at Rowena's office the next morning. She texted me before I even pulled out of the parking lot. This just turned from civil to criminal. Vernon sent a group message that morning. Family dinner tonight? Let's clear the air. I stared at it for a full minute before responding with a single word. Okay, I knew what this was. Not a truce, not a reconciliation, a performance, another attempt to shift blame and rewrite the truth. But that was fine. I had my own script this time. That evening, the dining room looked exactly as it always had. Same dark wood table, same cream-colored curtains that used to billow when I opened the windows in spring. but everything felt staged. Like we were sitting in a museum built from denial. Marietta greeted me with a tight smile. "Roast beef, your favorite." "Was," I said. I pulled out a chair and sat. Alaric and Bryony arrived last. Alaric's shirt was perfectly pressed, his hair styled like he was heading to a campaign rally. Bryony looked pale, like someone who hadn't slept right in days. We sat. Forks scraped plates. Marietta tried to talk about the weather, about her book club, anything to keep the conversation surface level. No one took the bait. Halfway through dinner, I stood. I brought something to share. Vernon tensed. Alaric looked annoyed. Marietta froze with a spoon halfway to her mouth. I walked into the living room, plugged my laptop into the TV, and hit play. Slide after slide filled the screen. Home improvement receipts with my name, photos of the kitchen stripped bare and rebuilt, timestamps from my old phone. The loan application appeared next, my name forged in sloppy script. Then Arnold's photo. Me on the roof, holding a nail gun, dated. Rowena's summary came last, her legal opinion laid out in blunt language. Fraud, misrepresentation, forgery. The room was silent, except for the low hum of the fridge in the kitchen. Vernon cleared his throat. "This doesn't prove anything." Marietta's voice cracked. "You said he knew Vernon. You told me he agreed to all of it." Bryony turned to Alaric, her eyes sharp. "You lied to me." Alaric stood like he was about to bolt. "We're not done," I said, locking eyes with him. Then I clicked to the final slide. A scanned letter in my grandfather's handwriting, dated 2 years before his death. In it, he clearly stated that he wanted the house left to me, because I had given it life again. "I found this in the safety deposit box," I said quietly. No one spoke. Bryony looked down at her lap. Marietta's lips trembled. Vernon just stared at the TV. "I'm filing the lien tomorrow," I said, "and I suggest you all get lawyers." Then I closed my laptop, stood, and walked out the front door into the cool night air. The next morning, I heard the knock just after sunrise. Sharp, official. A sheriff's deputy stood at the door holding a thick yellow envelope. "Are you Kellan Merrick?" I nodded. He handed it over with a clipboard. "Notice of lien. Requires acknowledgement." Vernon appeared behind me, still in his robe. "What's going on?" I signed, handed the clipboard back, and turned to Vernon without flinching. "This is real now." Vernon tried to snatch the envelope, but the deputy stopped him cold. "This is addressed to the listed claimant. Do not interfere." Marietta sat down on the stairs like her legs had given out. She didn't say a word. Her eyes darted between me and the envelope, like she was watching a house burn but still hoping someone would grab a hose. By midday, the neighborhood already knew. I stepped outside to retrieve the trash bin and caught 2 neighbors whispering at the end of the driveway. They stopped when they saw me, but their silence said enough. Arnold crossed the street later with a brown bag of apples from his tree and said quietly, "HOA got an anonymous email link to your video and documents. People are talking and listening." That night, an email popped into my inbox from Mrs. Dwyer, who lived 3 doors down and never once said more than hello. "I had no idea what they did to you," she wrote. "You deserved better." And then it happened. Bryony called. Her voice sounded like wind through broken glass. "I called off the wedding," she said. "No preamble, no small talk. I canceled everything." I didn't speak. "He lied about more than just the house," she added. "There's another woman, someone he was engaged to before me. She found me on Instagram, said he told her the same things, that he was building her a future. She even helped him with the down payment on a car." I didn't say, "I told you so." I didn't say anything. You were right, she whispered. And I was a fool. No, I said. You just trusted the wrong version of the same man. That night, I was in the kitchen reheating leftovers when the front door slammed open. Alaric stormed in, red-faced and shaking. You humiliated me, he yelled. You dragged this family through the mud. I didn't even look up from the microwave. No, you did that to yourself. He walked straight up to me, fists clenched. Do you think you're better than me now? You think this makes you the hero? I don't care about heroes, I said. I care about truth. Vernon came in from the hallway, barking. That's enough! I turned to him, slowly. You picked your golden son, I said, eyes locked. Let him fight his own battles. Alaric's mouth opened like he wanted to throw another punch, but the weight of his failure was already pressing down. He left without another word, the door banging shut behind him. It was close to midnight when I heard the mailbox clink. Inside was a small flash drive, taped to a folded note that read, You'll need this. It was Bryony's handwriting. I plugged it in. Inside were emails, dozens of them, between Alaric and Marietta, coordinating timelines, discussing how to process the loan without me noticing. One thread dated the day after I left for Portland. I opened Rowena's contact thread, attached the file, and typed, We're moving forward. I didn't feel victory, just the sound of things finally breaking clean. That morning, Rowena called to confirm what the courthouse had already emailed me. The lien had been registered. It was no longer just a word I tossed across dinner. It was legal, tied to documents and deadlines and a case file with my name at the top. I sat at the kitchen table staring at the confirmation, the seal embossed at the bottom. All I could think was, this isn't what I wanted, but it's what had to happen. Later that afternoon, I got a voicemail from Bryony. Her voice cracked on the second word. I wanted to say, I'm sorry I believed them for so long. I should have asked questions. I just thought, people don't lie like that unless they're scared. There was a pause, then the softest whisper. I hope you find peace in all this. I hope I do too. She didn't have to say what I already knew. The wedding was over. No church, no flowers, no pretending. Spokane knew it too. A local event planner posted cryptically on Facebook. When the cake melts before it's cut, maybe it was never meant to be served. The comment section was quiet. No defense, no rebuttals. Alaric posted a story on his account. Betrayal always comes from those closest to you. No one replied. And then the dominoes began to fall. The HOA board updated their public meeting notes. Lion and community dispute noted, HOA encourages member transparency. It was the nicest way to say, we know, we've seen the emails. By the end of the week, I'd heard through the grapevine that Vernon's former employer was opening an ethics review into his retirement package. Word travels when your last name's in a legal motion. Marietta stopped going outside. Groceries showed up at the front door in brown paper bags, and the curtains in their room stayed drawn day and night. For the first time in months, I slept through the night. A few days later, a video surfaced online. Not posted by me, not edited like a PR stunt. A contractor from 3 years ago, standing in front of our house, speaking to a blurry phone camera. Yeah, that guy. Kellan. He built all this, alone. His dad just sat on the porch drinking iced tea. Then it cut to time-stamped images. Me hauling lumber, kneeling on the shingles, hands blistered and shirt soaked in sweat. No voiceover, no music, just facts. It spread fast, first in the neighborhood, then across local Facebook groups, then Reddit, then emails. Dozens. I always wondered. Now it makes sense. You did right by that house. I didn't respond to most of them, but I read every one. Around dusk, Arnold slipped something under my door. It was an envelope. Inside, a folded note, yellowing from time. In Marietta's handwriting, "After Kellan leaves, we'll finish the transfer. Keep it quiet until after the wedding." It was dated 6 months ago. I held the paper for a long time before sliding it into a folder. The next morning, I placed it on Rowena's desk and said, "This is the last nail." The mediation room was colder than I expected. Not in temperature, but in presence. Every surface was polished, every corner clean, but no part of it felt like it belonged to anyone. Rowena sat beside me, a legal pad in front of her, 2 pens aligned like scalpels. Across the table were Alaric, looking like a man who wanted to scream but had rehearsed too many smirks. Vernon, arms crossed as if stubbornness could protect him. And Marietta, visibly smaller than I remembered, like shame had shrunk her from the inside out. The court-appointed mediator began, her tone dry and controlled. "We're here to address the lien, allegations of financial misconduct, and the proposed terms for settlement." I didn't speak. I let the quiet stretch. Let them feel what I'd sat in for a decade. Rowena took over, presenting every detail in order. The forged documents, the silent transfers, the money trail. She didn't raise her voice, didn't editorialize. It was all facts, facts wrapped in consequence. Alaric tried to cut in. "We didn't think it'd go this far." The mediator held up a hand. "You'll have your chance. No interruptions." Vernon let out a snort. "Come on. We're family. This is being blown way out of—" I turned my eyes toward him, not angry, just clear. "You stopped being family when you turned me into a liability." That shut him up. Then came Rowena's final document. Bryony has submitted a notarized statement confirming the timeline and her intent to testify if required. She'd also removed her name from any shared accounts or property filings. That was in the paperwork, too. The mediator looked to me. "The settlement terms propose repayment of the misused funds, acknowledgement of wrongdoing, and in exchange, you relinquish ownership claim to the home." I nodded. This was never about property. It was about my name being treated like a rumor. Alaric hesitated, but eventually signed. Vernon gripped the pen like it was a weapon. Marietta barely made eye contact as she scrawled her name, her hands shaking. When it was done, Vernon asked, "So, that's it?" Marietta added softly, "Will we ever speak again?" I stood, folder in hand. "I've been speaking for 10 years. No one listened." Rowena and I walked out of the room without another word. When we got to the parking lot, she finally asked, "Was it worth it?" I didn't answer, just watched the leaves tumble across the concrete, spinning in silence. 2 weeks had passed since mediation. Spokane had shifted fully into November. Cold mornings, bare trees, the smell of firewood in the air. I pulled into the driveway one last time. This visit wasn't about reclaiming anything. It was about closing a door without slamming it. Inside, the house echoed. No voices, no framed family photos. The walls looked wider somehow, like even they were relieved the pretending was over. In the study, I noticed something hung on the wall, a framed set of blueprints. Mine, the ones I drew by hand when I first sketched out the kitchen expansion. Alaric must have found them and hung them up. No name, no credit. I took them down, rolled them slowly, and tucked them under my arm. That would be the only thing I'd take today that mattered. The rest, just boxes. I didn't even fill one. Around noon, my phone lit up. Vernon. I hesitated, then answered. "She's not doing well," he said. "Marietta, she barely eats." I let silence settle before I answered. "I'm sorry to hear that." "This doesn't have to be how we end," he added. "People make mistakes. Family forgives." I said it plainly. "Family doesn't forge." There was a pause. He didn't push, and I didn't offer more. Later that afternoon, I mailed off the certified copies of the settlement. With them, I included a handwritten note. No inheritance, no legacy. You signed me out of your story, so now I'm just returning the favor. Attached were 2 forms. One removed Vernon as my emergency contact. The other revoked his medical power of attorney. Rowena had helped draft both. She called it safety. I called it breath. Back at the cottage, I spent the next few days in the garden. I built a small raised bed, nothing like the elaborate ones I had before. Just wood, soil, and intention. The first thing I planted was rosemary, then thyme, then basil. Bryony sent a text that night. Where you build next, don't forget who you are. I didn't reply, but I walked outside, ran my hand across the soil, and whispered, I won't. The wind carried the smell of pine through the yard. Leaves flicked against the porch like soft knocks. And then, right before bed, I checked the mailbox. Inside, a plain envelope. No name on the front. Just a note inside from Arnold. I signed my will. The house next to mine. It's yours now. I figured someone ought to live near trees who knows how to grow things. I read it again. And again. Then I folded the letter, set it on the counter, grabbed my coat. Stepping into the cool air, I looked up at the stars above Spokane and said quietly, let's get to work. Sometimes, the people who raise you are also the ones who try to rewrite your story. But here's what I've learned. Just because someone helped build your beginning doesn't mean they have the right to decide your ending. You don't owe anyone silence when the truth is what sets you free. If you've ever felt like the invisible one in your own family, or like your value was measured only when convenient, let this be your reminder. You are not crazy, and you are not alone. Sometimes choosing peace means walking away from the people who call themselves your foundation, but never acted like it. I didn't fight for a house. I fought for the right to be remembered correctly. And in doing so, I found something better than revenge. I found myself. Maybe you've been through something similar. Maybe you're still sitting at someone else's table, waiting for a thank you that'll never come. So let me ask you, what do you need to let go of to finally feel free? If this story spoke to you, leave a 1 in the comments or tell me where you're watching from. If it didn't, I still want to hear from you. What would you have done differently? Let's talk. And if you believe in stories that speak truth, healing, and hard-won peace, don't forget to subscribe. There's more to come.